Okay, thank you everyone for coming tonight. Tonight, Lori Tobias is going to be speaking to us. Lori Tobias is an author and journalist who has freelanced for both local and national outlets, including the New York Times, the Seattle Times, the Oregonian, and 1859 magazine. Stormbeat is her first book of nonfiction. Her novel Wander won the Nancy Pearl Book Award for Best Book of Fiction from the Pacific Northwest Writers Association. She lives on the Oregon coast with her husband Chan and rescue pups Luna and Monkey. Lori, thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I completely appreciate, totally appreciate in my own backyard being invited to do this.
Well, thank you so much.
So I'll just jump right in.
Okay, that sounds
Sound
great.
good? Okay. So when I came to the coast in 2020, I was pretty sure I understood what I was in for weather-wise. We'd lived in Southern Oregon for about 3 years back in the 90s, and we spent almost every weekend camping in Brookings, Bandon, and Coos Bay. So when we had the opportunity to move here, I thought I had a good idea of what to expect. I knew that it would be fairly mild and that I wasn't likely to see snow and that the winters would be, pretty dreary, but that was okay with me. I thought I got it. So when my husband interviewed for a job with the PUD, that was in 2000, the bosses invited me out for lunch. And I knew that what they wanted to know was, one, could I handle living in a small town? And two, did I know it rained? A lot, particularly in the winter. And I did. I thought I did. Truth was, I had no idea. And I was about to learn. So my first day here, I go to Walmart and I buy cleaning supplies. And it's a Sunday and it's gorgeous. And I'm just patting myself on the back for the good fortune of moving here. And I go through the checkout and I kind of tell the young girl, what's going on. And she said, "Oh, you're going to hate it here. All it does in the winter is rain, rain, rain. Trust me, you're going to hate it." Now, I'll be honest, I was a little worried when she said that. I thought, oh my God, what have I done? In truth, the rain never bothered me that much. I mean, sure, there's that time when you're coming out of the grocery store and it's coming down in buckets and you're wondering how you're going to get to your car. There's times when it rains every day for a month. But by and large, the sun always comes out and you're happy. Although what I've noticed is when we do get sunshine and it hasn't rained for a while, there is always somebody who's going to say, "Gee, I wonder when we're going to get some rain," or "Boy, it's been a while since we've had rain," or "We sure could use some rain." And I had to laugh, but it's true. And I don't think I'm any different. I'm the same way. When we haven't had rain for a while, it's like, "Hey, what's up? Where's the rain?" So like the rain, I thought I understood winter storms. And when I signed on with the Oregonian in 2004, the storms became part of my beat. If there was a storm coming, it was my job to let everybody know, "Storm's coming, time to run out and get all those things you can't live without for the few days." And then after the storm came through, it was my job to report on the damage, the winds, the flooding, the landslides. So in 2006, I learned we were having a pretty heavy duty storm season. And I learned that there were 2 houses that were about to fall off the headland. I was here almost. Rain, I shoved it down my jeans. I always since. But the woman who owned the house, she and her husband, she greeted me. She was very gracious under a huge amount of pressure. People were just running in and out, helping her pack up her house. The golden retriever sitting in the garage in a kennel, just happy as could be. And she welcomes me inside and kind of explains what's going on. And meanwhile, she's packing up all these valuables. And she says, "Come on, I'll show you." And she leads me upstairs. And we go to the guest bedroom and she opens the door to the second floor deck. And I have to say, I'm terrified of heights, absolutely terrified of heights. And so we look out on the deck and normally, there's a pretty good distance down, but they have their yard. But now there's can't see it on here, but there's like 4 feet of yard and that's it. Once that yard's gone, it's going to start chewing away at the land underneath the foundation. So I am staring down at this huge, gaping emptiness. And below me, there's a dump truck and a heavy equipment operator, and they are trying to build a road so that they can bring in the big boulders and stop the erosion. And I'm out on the deck and I'm supposed to get pictures, but I'm shaking so bad I can't hold the camera still. And I'm out there alone and it's blowing and the rain's coming sideways and I know I have a job to do, but I cannot calm my nerves. And all of a sudden, bang! And of course I about launched, and then I realized the door had slammed shut. So my first thought is, oh God, I'm locked out, which I wasn't. I didn't ever get any usable pictures. They were all so shaky, it was ridiculous. But the homes were saved. But sadly enough, the next morning we learned that there were two women. They had approached the deputy who was directing traffic, brought her a coffee. The deputy told them this isn't the day to walk on the beach, and they went out anyway, and they were washed out to sea. And so that was kind of a, that was a very sad ending to that story. And then about a month later, another storm blew in, and I was a little worried about this one. And I said to my editor, I'm probably going to lose power. And she said, you still have to follow your story. So sure enough, later that day, we start losing power. And so I wrote the top portion of my story so that at least that part was done. I mean, I really couldn't write anything more until the storm happened. And my husband was a power lineman at the time at the PUD. And, we started losing power and he was called out to work. And I'm sitting here in my office listening to the scanner. And it was the first time I'd listened to the scanner during a storm. And I hear about these lines falling and they're igniting fires. And so it really unnerved me. And then suddenly there's a loud kaboom. My power was out. Something had caused the transformer outside my window to blow up or whatever it did. But everything was just instantly in darkness. So I got my notepad and my cell phone and the candles and the flashlight, and I moved out to the kitchen and I filed my story. I wrote it in longhand, and then I called the desk in Portland and I read it over the phone. And the one thing that happened that I had never known to happen before is the Coast Guard closed the coast. If you were out at sea, you couldn't get back in. And if you were in port, you couldn't go back out. And I had never known them to do that. But anyway, the next day I got a phone call to head up to Lincoln City. And when I was there, I found the remains of a catamaran, the cat shot, on the beach. And there was a long piece of yellow rope sort of trailing. It was, the remains of this boat. And there was an officer there and he said, well, that is where they tied off so they wouldn't get washed out to sea. And obviously it didn't work. It was a crew of 3, and they were bringing the catamaran from South Africa to Seattle. And I think the last they were heard from was off of Port Orford. And they were never found. So that was a time period when we were having a lot of storms. And it was always rushing out, it seemed, to cover something. And I got a call one time for Highway 20, where there was hundreds, if not thousands, of trees that had blown over in the wind. And it had happened at night, and I honestly have no idea how it was that no one, driving that road in the dark had been killed. I don't even think there had been any cars hit. And at the same time, or the same sort of situation, there was a house in Astoria, and they were in a fairly rural area, lots of big trees that they were very proud of, but these trees started coming down on the house. And so they told me they just raced from room to room, and they would watch out the window and they would kind of try to get a sense of where the next tree was coming and race to another room to avoid it. And that's what they did for, I think more than an hour, and they survived it, but it was pretty ugly. There was a landslide right here at Yaquina Head, and the guy who does admission got trapped in the little booth, and he got out by crawling out the window. And then there were floods, and especially in Tillamook. And I remember one time driving into town, and it's raining and it's cold and it's blowing, and I had to put all my windows down because the river was so high. I was afraid I was going to get sucked in. But I covered storms. And so, but as people here know, if the winds aren't 65, 70 plus, people just kind of take it as the norm. Certainly not sustained, but when we just get those big gusts, it's not that unusual. And then one year that really stands out for me was 2009, and that is because it was the gloomiest summer I've ever experienced here. And it didn't rain, it was just gray and it was foggy. And meanwhile, everybody in the valley was having this beautiful sunny hot summer, and we couldn't, it was just constantly gray. So I'm running on the beach, and I run from Agate Beach to Nye Beach. And the tide, and I'm not a fast runner, and the tide was really out far. So I'd gotten myself much further out than I usually do. And so I start kind of angling back in closer, and I see this landmass, kind of like if you would see Jump Off Joe's. And I thought, I don't remember there being these rock formations there. I just don't recall that. And I thought, well, because I had gotten farther out and everything, maybe my sense of where I was skewed. After a while, I realized there was a boat that had washed up on Nye Beach, and big boat, big boat. And so I turn around. I don't have my phone. I don't have my notepad. I don't have my camera. So I turn around and I run back for Agate Beach, where my phone's waiting in my RAV. And I get there and I call the front desk, or not the front desk, the city desk in Portland. And I tell them what's going on. And she said, well, how fast can you get there? And I said, well, I have to go home and get my notebook and get my camera and get my. So I hurry home and I get back down to Nye Beach. And I meet the two men the crew, there was just two of them on this big boat. And they told me what all happened. They had been frightened half to death. I think one of them was sleeping, and I don't know what happened to the other. But when they washed up on shore, it was night. They didn't really know where they were, and they were frightened. They felt very endangered. But what really scared me there was you've got this 70-ton boat kind of rolling in the water, and there are these kids playing in the water around it. Now, the cops are there, the parents are there, but obviously the police officers are busy. They've got things to take care of because you've got this big boat sitting there. I don't know what the parents were thinking, but a lot of us were just kind of gasping, like one big wave and that boat's going to shift and it could be deadly. Everything worked out fine, but the one thing that's kind of funny is when it was over, when it was over, I couldn't run in shoes for the rest of the season because my feet were so tore up from the sand getting in my shoes and my rush to get back to Agate Beach. But I got a note from somebody, and they said, well, of course the boat ran aground. They changed the boat's name, and that's apparently bad luck. So if you ever buy a boat, don't change the name. And then we get thunderstorms here. They're not loud, they're not big, and so I don't mind them. But I grew up where we had really bad thunderstorms in the summer all the time in central Pennsylvania, and we would get these warnings and watches, and there'd be tornado watches. And I never really adapted to it. I was always frightened of them, but we never had a tornado. And oddly, then, as a young reporter, I was working near New Haven, Connecticut. And we got these warnings of really violent weather coming in. And after a while, the sky turned this really weird color yellow. And we did get a storm, pretty strong, but not that bad. And I'm heading home from work, and I get in the car, and I have the radio on, and I hear the announcers start talking like, if you're missing someone, go to such and such a center, go to this community hall. And I was like, what is going on? And I get home, and my husband is lacing up his work boots and packing his tool bag. And he said, I don't know when I'm going to see you again. Well, a tornado had gone through this little town by New Haven, and it had done horrendous damage. And a little bit later, my editor sent me to work on the story. And I remember seeing a car through the second floor of a house. But what was really strange is that it wasn't like a huge swath. It was just this very direct path. One house over here would be fine, but then this whole block would be devastated. And I don't know if they ever made a decision, but they debated for a while, was it a tornado or was it a wind shear? And I don't know if they ever got their answer. But anyway, so there came a time here on the coast, it's October, and I get a message that there was a tornado in Lincoln City. And so it was a nice day. And so I actually put the dogs in the car. And my husband, I said, let's just drive up and I'll see if I can get some pictures. It was a weekend. And we hit Lincoln City, and suddenly it was black. It was just black. And you could tell there was some really dangerous weather in the midst. The water on the highway was up over the tires. It was really, and of course, my biggest worry is I had my dogs with me. And, we're going into this really violent weather. So I just said to my husband, if anything happens, get yourself and the dogs to safety. I'll be fine. And so then I went. So there was a roof missing from a building and there was some minor damage. So I go and I knock on this oceanfront house, this door, and it was a rental. And this young couple let me in. And as it got closer and closer, they realized
Oh, hold on. We lost you for a second there. Could you start from the young couple opening the door?
Okay, so
Your pause.
this young couple opened the door. Are we good? So this young couple opened the door, and they were renters, let me in, and they started telling me about how that night they had seen this swirling column of water coming in off the ocean. And I don't know if they knew it was water, but it was nighttime and the lights from the houses lit up the spray on this column. And so they just stood and watched it. And finally, it's getting closer and closer, and they realized they could be in danger and they hit the floor. Well, when that column of water hit land, it was a tornado and it went right by their house. And it's interesting because we always kind of get annoyed with people. Why didn't they do something? But they didn't really know what they were seeing. And it all ended well. But I think it was 7 years later, Manzanita, and this wasn't that long ago, got hit by a really bad one. And I think I read just recently, I was looking it up, and I think the damage was like $1.1 million. And I know there were some businesses that never did recover because it took away the buildings. And then by the time they had a place to locate their business, it was, too late. So we don't think of tornadoes here on the coast, but they happen. And snow. I moved here thinking we weren't going to have snow, and for a long time we didn't. And then when we did, it would be a dusting, and it was really sweet because any place with a slope, you would see kids on pieces of cardboard trying to sled. And down on the beach, you would see people trying to build snowmen, which were really more sand than snow. But it was, just the whole idea. Everybody got in the spirit of things. And so 2012, we're just home from our annual Let's Go Someplace Warm trip. And we're in the hot tub in the backyard. I think it was March. And it starts snowing. And usually when we got snow, I think it came maybe in the middle of the night. And this was early evening. And there was something about it that I said, this is different. And then a little later that night, the roof on our woodshed collapsed. And I said to my husband, this is going to be bad. So at midnight, he got called out to work. And when he left, we still had power. So I'm laying in bed. And a couple hours later, I wake up and I hear this low calories, low calories. And you know how you do that thing like, am I dreaming? I mean, what is going on? And I knew I wasn't dreaming. I was hearing this voice, this disembodied voice saying low calories. And so finally I get up, I open the bedroom door, and our smoke alarm is out in the hallway. Well, it's hardwired, but when we lost power, it lost that power, and the batteries that were in it were weak. And so, yeah, that was low calories. But, they were actually saying low batteries. And so I get up in the morning and it was beautiful. It was a world of white, but there were tons of trees fallen because the ground was so saturated from our winter rain. And then the tops were covered with the snow. The trees just simply couldn't hold up. And so, so the roads were closed down. And the other thing that happened is I would hear on the scanner drivers that were just panicked, who didn't know how to drive on snow, didn't know how to drive on ice. And they've either run into the ditch or they've just given up and they won't drive and they want somebody to take them home. And so it wasn't funny, but we didn't have that much snow either. And so then by the time the snow quit, Newport had 6 inches, Tillamook had 8.5, and Florence had 5. And I think I read that Coos Bay had something like 100 car accidents, fender benders by the large part, but still. So that amount of snow seems kind of humorous, except for here, it shuts us down. And then that brings me to the tsunami. And I'm going to read a little bit here. I had heard all about the 1964 earthquake. My husband had been in it. He remembered that he was watching cartoons, and the cartoons, they lost, the TV channel. His house got off its foundation, got slid off its foundation. And of course, around here, we all know about Crescent City. I think there was 11 or 12 lives lost, just devastated that city. And here in Newport, Beverly Beach got hit, and there were 4 kids camping with their parents, and they died. They got washed to sea. And there was also a woman in Seaside who had the misfortune of sitting outside City Hall or the fire station or someplace in a police car, and the siren went, and I think it gave her a heart attack, and she died. So I'm just going to read something real quick here about something that I found kind of fascinating. This was after the Indian Ocean tsunami, and everybody around here started paying attention and having these conferences and stuff. So in 1964, Kathleen Clark, a featured speaker at the conference, and that's a conference up at Otter Rock on tsunamis, was a college sophomore on a spring break with her family in Neskowin. All evening, as Clark and her family waited for the wave to hit, they listened to the ocean roaring outside their cottage. Then, she recalled, suddenly the ocean went silent. There wasn't any sound, no ocean. Clark. A minute passed, then another, and then came a wall of water. Friend and brother watched the ocean withdraw as the night grew silent. The second, even bigger wave followed, and after that, a third. And then it was over, she said. As Clark watched the news accounts of the Indian Ocean tsunami, she understood the fascination that kept some eyewitnesses transfixed and frozen when they should have been racing to save their own lives. She had done the same thing. We didn't run, we didn't head for higher ground, she said. We just sat and watched. So when the phone started ringing in 2011, it was my editors letting me know a tsunami was coming. It was almost midnight. It was the tsunami that followed the Japan earthquake. And so I said, hey, it's due here at 7. Can I just at least stay in bed till 5? And I get up in the morning, and about 5 a.m., which is usually a pretty dead, dark time. And it was probably more like 4, just a dead, dark time on the coast. Nobody's around. But that morning, there were just tons of pickup trucks pulling trailers, pulling RVs, campers, and of course they were all heading inland. And I did a little drive around, and they had a shelter up in Glen Eden Beach for people who got evacuated off the beach and off of homes that were close to that. And eventually I met the photographer from Portland, and I said to him, let's meet at Yaquina Bay Lighthouse parking lot because we'll be safe, but we'll have full view. So we met there, and it was kind of interesting because everybody from town was there. And even though it wasn't a funny occasion, it was like this reunion. People seeing each other they hadn't seen for a while. I met people I'd never met before, but knew of or talked to. And eventually we all just said, this is a non-event, let's go home. And in fact, it wasn't a non-event. There was a man killed down, I think, on the border of California and Oregon. Depot Bay lost part of its dock. I interviewed a guy who was in a boat, and the wave just picked it up and set it back down on the dock. But the news that stays with me is a year after all of this, a year we've been talking about what are we going to see in tsunami debris, and it was my husband's birthday, and I drove up to Seaside. Well, the talk was, would there be bodies? It got pretty gruesome. And if there were valuables, what would we do with them? And, what was this going to look like? What kind of debris were we going to get? So I went up to Seaside for a ride along with the park manager or park ranger. He was going to show me how much debris was here and talk about what we could expect. So, we saw plastics and foam and pretty much the usual from a lot of different countries, and a sea lion that had been shot through the head. And eventually I come home trying to get ready for this birthday dinner for my husband. And I start getting messages and phone calls. Have you seen this massive whatever it was on Agate Beach. And my first thing, sort of like I am with storms, is, oh, come on, it's not from Japan. Well, I trudged down there, I got my camera out, and I got my zoom lens and took off my shoes, and I'm trudging across the dunes, and I get close enough to zoom in and get a photo to make my editors happy. And I ship that off to them, and I go and we have the birthday celebration. But in the morning, I found that it was, in fact, from Japan. It was something like 211 tons. It was one of, I think, three, but this was the first one to land. And that whole summer, just people just filled the coast, clogged Ocean View Drive, overrun the parking lots. I mean, just you can't even imagine. I think Father's Day weekend, we normally see, I'm doing this off the top of my head, but I think it's like 3,000 people in a particular park. There's like 14,000 people. So it was just gridlock, logjam. So I wrote about it the whole summer. That's what I wrote about this thing. One morning I was jogging on the beach and somebody had painted a mural on it. I saw license plates from all over the country, from Canada. And then comes August and they're going to remove this dock. And people didn't want them to remove it. They wanted it to stay on the beach like the Peter Iredale, which of course the parks people said, can you imagine if we just let everything sit on the beach, what our beaches would look like? So I mentioned that it came in on my husband's birthday. We get to August 1st and I spend the first day on the beach and it is hideously cold. The wind is blowing. I can get no shelter from it because, well, there's no place to shelter. And so I would interview people who had their cars down on the beach. They would, like the officials, and then I could sit in their car. I couldn't leave and go home because if I came back, I wasn't going to be able to get a parking spot. So I dealt with it the whole day and they couldn't get the dock free. It was going to be, the first cut was going to be at 11 and then it was going to be 1 and they were going to have it up at 3 and they finally just quit giving us times. And I come home and just exhausted from being out in the cold and the wind. And so I get up the next morning and we're going to do it again. In the morning, my pillow was covered in sand. It was in my ears, in my hair, embedded in my skin. But the contractors planned an early start and I was showered and on my way to the beach by 7 a.m. I was set to fly home soon and my niece Tabby had emailed me to talk about what we might do during my stay. As I walked over the temporary road on the beach, I called and left her a message. The wind hadn't picked up yet, so I'd be able to hear her, I said. I watched the work get underway. The last I'd heard, the workers had cut through the first section, but the force of the water kept it suctioned to the beach. I filed a quick brief to post on our website, then went to talk to Chris Havel, who was the spokesman with Parks, about their plan. Direction she was headed, even with the temporary gains. But standing there and
I hate to interrupt you, but you froze again. Could you start reading it from just about the beginning?
okay,
I'm sorry, it was a long one.
where do you want me to start?
The last we heard, she was going to be able to hear you over the wind, I think.
Okay. The wind hadn't picked up yet, so I'd be able to hear her, I said. I watched the work get underway. The last I'd heard, the workers had cut through the first section, but the force of the water kept it suctioned to the beach. I filed a quick brief to post on our website, then went to talk to Chris Havel, the spokesman for the parks. The last thing I wanted to do was spend another day on the beach in the wind. My cell rang. It was my niece Tabby, but I ignored it and continued my conversation with Havel. She rang in again and I answered. She was crying. The nursing home had called. My mom was in hospice. Moments later, she called again, crying even harder. The home had called a second time and told her to get there right away. I'd known ever since my mom's shoulder surgery that she was dying. Until then, I would have given her another decade at least. But once she underwent the failed operation, it was clear there was only one direction she was headed, even with the temporary gains. But standing there and really trying to grasp that she would soon be gone, might even be gone already, did not even seem possible. And I had no idea what to do. I froze. I think I may have told one of the other reporters hanging around. I may have called my husband. Finally, I asked Havel for a ride to my car. I thought I would head home, pick up my dog, and go for an iced coffee. I guess I was just trying to give myself something concrete to do. I walked into the office and called my niece, who sobbed. I didn't make it on time. My mom died at 10:55 Eastern Daylight Time, about the same time I was asking Havel for a ride. So the dock for me will always be the dock that washed in on my husband's birthday and that they finally got rid of on the day my mom died. So I'm open to any questions.
Okay.